Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Stage Dynamics, and this is the Lantac ECT-1 Single Stage Drop-In Trigger. Oh boy, I love Lantac products. I'm a huge fan of my Raven rifle. If you're familiar with the review I did on it, I had nothing but really good things, almost all good, really good things to say about it, and obviously I'm still a believer in it because I'm still using it. Lantac sent me their new ECT-1 trigger, and I figured the best place to put it would be in their rifle. Now, I have a love-hate, mostly hate relationship with cassette-style drop-in self-enclosed triggers because I shoot suppressed a lot, and I've yet to have a cassette-style trigger, a drop-in style trigger that lended itself very, very well, especially on a direct impingement gun, to suppressed shooting. Usually the additional amount of debris and gas and carbon that's going to make its way back into the lower receiver tends to gum those triggers up in very short order, especially if you're using a lubricant that likes to collect particulates, which I try to avoid, but all lubricants to a certain degree until they're burnt off from heat will collect some degree of particulates, some worse than others. So while I was happy to see that Lantac was releasing the single stage, I was a little bit apprehensive because I knew if problems were going to happen, I was going to have to say bad things about the trigger. Of course, don't misunderstand me. It's not that I'm not willing to say bad things. It's just I don't want to say bad things about a company I really, really like. So going into the review, I was anxious and nervous about how the trigger was going to perform. I was definitely worried about that fact. Getting into the actual features of the ECT-1, it is a drop-in trigger, which means it's plug and play. You drop it in, you put your pins back in, you reinstall your safety if you had to take it out, depending on how you're able to finesse that trigger group into the rifle, and you're good to go. A 3.5 pound hybrid curved trigger on the one that I got, and it is single stage. Now, as far as the trigger performance goes, the feel of the trigger, everybody wants to talk about the feel and the reset, and that is very important because not all triggers are created equal. In fact, none of them really are. The ECT-1 has a very, very noticeable wall, very little take up because it is a single stage. The cool thing about it, though, is even though it is a single stage, so it kind of lends itself very, very well to going cyclic, if you will, full Ricky Bobby, you can still use it to a certain degree for a precise trigger as long as you understand how the trigger is going to perform once you get some good practice on it. So while it does lend itself very well to those close distance, really, really high round count, really, really fast, dubstep-esque Instagram type shoot situations, you can also use it to reach out and touch something much further away than the target stand you set up at 25 meters to impress your friends. I like that because usually single stages do not allow you a degree of precision at that distance, not as well as a two-stage trigger would, a more precision-focused or general-purpose-focused trigger. Most single-stage triggers are one-trick ponies, so I was glad to see that even in the single-stage configuration, I was able to use the ECT-1 for longer distance shooting without a great degree of accuracy lost because I don't have that prep set. The hammer, the trigger, and the disconnector are made from S7 tool steel, which is a very, very strong steel if you're not familiar. And it is a departure from the previous generation of Lantac ECT-1. There has been some redesigns in the way that the functionality works on the trigger and some of the geometry involved. If you really wanted to get into minutia, if you were to take them both apart and compare them, the previous generation, the current generation, there's definitely been some refinements made. The refinement I noticed the most is probably just the consistent contact between the hammer and the disconnector is greater than what I was getting from the previous generation trigger, which I like a lot because previous generation trigger, if you got it really, really, really dirty, sometimes like to not reset properly, and that's not something that we want in a trigger. Triggers should be able to withstand a certain degree of round count before they need to be cleaned out. And that gets me right into talking about the durability and what I was initially apprehensive about with the ECT-1 is the fact that it is a cassette style trigger. and I do shoot a lot of suppressed, was that going to cause any issues once I started to get into my 2,000 round review process? Well, first thing I did on the trigger was my 500 round burn down. I wanted to get 500 rounds through the gun, through the trigger, as fast as possible. Because I was concerned of the ECT-1, and even though I was going to be doing a lot of suppressed shooting over the period of the review, I wanted to take half of that review, that 500 round burn down, and shoot it suppressed. Made it through with nary an issue. This trigger is fast, and that's one of my first things that I notice. Even taking it and putting it on the shot timer, I notice that my splits can be consistently lower than what I'm going to get from the trigger that I'm using the most right now, which is the ALG ACT, which granted is a totally different category of trigger. But that goes to show that, you know, sometimes you do need something a little bit aftermarket to get your speeds where you want them if you're already confident with your other skills and you're proficient with the other fundamentals and you just want the gun to go faster. This trigger is definitely going to give you that. Now, after the 500 round burn down, I put the rifle away, obviously didn't clean it, didn't lubricate it. I wanted everything to cool and harden up where it was going to harden up, and then bring it back out to the range, immediately put a suppressor on it and see if it's going to create any issues. I was glad to find out that it didn't. So getting into that second 500 rounds and leaning on towards the 2,000 round review process, I wasn't experiencing any issues because I was shooting a high volume of suppressed shooting. And this, of course, the Raven is a DI gun, so you are getting more gas compared to like a piston gun back into the receiver. So if something was going to happen, I expected it to happen within that first 2,000 rounds. Why? Because my previous experience with cassette style triggers has shown me that I can get myself into some trigger efficiency or some trigger malfunction issues very easily within 500 rounds, let alone 2,000 rounds. Now, during the review process, I used 3 different types of ammo. I bring that up because 3 different types of ammo means 3 different types of primers, and some lighter triggers do not strike with significant enough force to ignite certain types of ammunition. So I was using Black Hill 77. I was also using Fiocchi 55 grain, a little bit of Wolf steel case, and then some PMC and 55 grain as well. I've had problems with PMC in the past, not the ammo itself, but in relation to certain triggers. Those lighter triggers don't always necessarily ignite that primer, especially when the rifle starts to get gritty and dirty and the trigger itself starts to collect that additional carbon you're going to get from suppressed shooting. Happy to report that even though the trigger did become a little bit sluggish there towards the end, you can definitely feel it when you open up the receiver and you mess with the trigger itself. I didn't have any reset issues or any malfunction issues with the ECT-1 during the entire 2,000 round review process. Of course, that's talking about a very specific relationship. I'm using a 14.5 DI gun with the Lantac 1 can. Now, if you change the relationship of barrel length or gas system length or the suppressor you're using, high pressure versus lower pressure cans, you as the end user may experience some problems once you get to those higher round counts. My solution to you is, even if you don't have any issues, that trigger needs more attention when it comes time for weapons maintenance than what you're necessarily going to give to a traditional style trigger. I've got some ALGs and a couple of Geisleys that I've literally never cleaned out purposely, other than just spraying some solvent in there and then a little point lubrication. But I've never actually gone in there with a Q-tip or a pipe cleaner or anything like that and purposely cleaned that trigger group or removed it and cleaned it. And I haven't had any issues with them. And these are on guns that have very, very high suppressed round counts. The advantages to a cassette style trigger are the fact that it's easily dropped in. That's definitely one of the appeals, and you have way less play in the total trigger package based on the tolerances of your lower receiver. The potential disadvantages, you definitely have to pay more attention to them when it comes to weapon maintenance, especially if you're going to shoot suppressed. So if you like cassette style drop-in triggers and you like super fast single stage triggers, the ECT-1 is an awesome trigger, but the cautionary tale, of course, the advice I'm going to give you, the caveat, if you will, is to make sure that you're cleaning and paying more attention to that trigger, especially if you're going to shoot suppressed, versus what you would necessarily pay attention to with a traditional style trigger. My overall impressions of the trigger are very, very positive. I was glad that that apprehension that I had about shooting it suppressed for a high volume count, or high round count rather, with a high volume, was misplaced. Now granted, if I didn't clean it out for 4,000 or 5,000 rounds, could I have a problem? Potentially. And that's something that I'm definitely going to check out on my own. But at least for that initial break-in period, or 2,000 round review period, if you will, the ECT-1 performed just as well in the first round as it did on the last, and that's something that I definitely like to see from a trigger that's going to cost me a little bit of money over what I can get like a mil-spec trigger for from, you know, Brownells or something like that for like 25, 35 bucks. The price difference is basically all attributable to the performance you're going to get out of the trigger. So if you're a big single stage fan, and I definitely have to mention the hybrid curve on it. It's not quite flat, it's not quite curved, and I found that to be damn appealing. Even though I'm more of a flat trigger kind of guy for most of my rifle purposes, I definitely appreciated some of the thought that went into that trigger design. And there's enough mass in the trigger itself that you definitely feel the press. There are some single stage triggers out there, especially the lighter ones, that the trigger itself is so light you don't really feel a lot of that actual mass resistance during the pull. So I definitely appreciated that the trigger is a little wider and a little heavier than what I've seen with some triggers, comparable triggers from other manufacturers. Definitely glad to see that. So I'm definitely giving the ECT-1 a huge recommendation because I like the trigger a lot. I like Lantac's products, so I was glad to see that I didn't have anything super negative to say about the trigger in this review process because I wanted it to be good, and thank God it was. I'm Eric Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.